Mm. Welcome, everyone, to the Queen and the Water of Life. Mm. Long, long ago, in a time beneath time, on a land that could be on the land that we now stand, or it could have been on a land far, far away, there was a great kingdom with this lush forest teeming with life, lush with plants that yielded medicines and foods. Animals were abundant and wanted for nothing. And within this kingdom, there were a people. And within this people, they lived in a humble way as a part of nature, recognizing that they were merely but one strand in this tapestry of life revolving around and around the sacred hoop. And within these people, there was a queen and there was a king who also lived in these humble ways, in togetherness with the people in the land. And then one day the queen and the king had a child. And all the whole kingdom rejoiced and they celebrated. And together they loved to watch and witness this child grow. Until one day, as the child was out amongst the forest, perhaps on an adventure, perhaps listening in to the songs of the plants, something happened. An accident occurred and the child died. All the kingdom grieved. Tears flowed from the animals and the plants, from the trees, from all of the people, and especially from the queen and the king. But then something happened to the king. A fear rose up inside of him, and he felt his grief like the currents of a deep ocean pulling him as if he'd be swallowed down into those dark, cold depths. And he was afraid the king was afraid he would be swallowed whole by his ocean of grief. So the king said, I cannot grieve. He forced himself to surface from his grief. And he went to his queen and said, Dear queen, we must cease our grieving. We must be strong for our people and for our land. Otherwise, outsiders may take advantage of us. Now, the queen, her heart was broken. And the tears flowed down and pulled like these torrential currents and tides, and other times felt like she was being thrown and shattered across these jagged rocks along the ocean shore, the edge of worlds. And the queen, she too feared being swallowed by this grief, swallowed by her sorrow. And so she too forced herself to surface from the ocean of her grief. And the queen and the king, they made this announcement of a new decree that grieving was now forbidden. Each person can grieve for only 3 days, but then they must get on with life. So all the people, they closed off their grief. They dried their eyes and they forced themselves to get on with life. But when they dried their eyes, something happened. The people, they all experienced a kind of brokenness, where they would once circle around the fire and sing their grief up into the wind as an expression of being touched by life and how deeply they have loved. Now their grief settled down into closed hearts. Their bodies became heavy, and a cloak seemed to veil the beauty of life. See, it was once said that sorcerers gained their powers by burying their hearts, but that today's people have buried their hearts in the wrong places, closed off their grief, and lost their power. And so when this happened, when the people closed their hearts, the rains stopped gifting their essence to the land. The lakes and rivers went dry. The waters of life that once flowed now disappeared. The land and the hearts of the people became barren. And to all the lands around this kingdom became known as the kingdom of the flat people, for they had such a small expression of life. They did not show much joy. They did not show much grief. Then one day, the queen was walking secretly amongst the canyons during the full moon. Emotions were rising just like the moon pulls the tide. Emotions she could no longer hide. And the tears started to flow from the queen. And the queen, she took her hand and tried to catch her tears, to stop them, to conceal them. But they overflowed her hand and they poured out onto the earth. She stopped at this large boulder and she placed her hand on it to embrace herself as she felt that her body would crumble. But then she felt as if someone's soft hands had wrapped around her fingers and was holding her. Someone had placed their hand on her shoulder and was supporting her. The queen, she looked up and found herself looking into the soft, lovingly gazing eyes of an old, wrinkled-faced woman who looked as if she was carved out of the mountains of time herself. She had a soft, comforting presence that set the queen at ease and gave her a kind of inner permission to let the tears flow. And the queen asked through her sobbing, "Who are you? Who are you? Where did you come from? I didn't see you here. I'm so sorry that you are seeing me like this." And the old wrinkle-faced woman smiled so lovingly in a way that held the queen. And she said, oh queen, there's nothing to be sorry for. There's nothing to be sorry for. Let your tears flow, for they are the waters of life. Look down at your feet, dear queen, and where your tears have touched the earth. And the queen, she looked down at the earth, and right there on that parched desert soil, that earthen soil, she saw these fresh flowers sprouting before her eyes. The queen looked back at the old wrinkled-faced woman and asked, who are you? Where'd you come from? An old wrinkled face said, I am old grandmother. I am of the stone people who carry the stories and the songs and the endangered rememberings throughout time. And she said, when a tradition or a story or a knowledge is forgotten, it isn't lost. It merely returns to the earth where we, the stone people, harvest it and hold it until the people are ready to remember. And then we return it to those people once again. And so, dear queen, it is time for you to remember how to grieve so you can return the waters of life to the land, to the people, to yourself. Queen's eyes are streaming with tears now. The moon was pulling her emotions. Her heart was feeling wide open and it hurt. And she didn't want to feel it. And she said, the queen, she said, but it hurts, old grandmother. It hurts and I don't want to feel this pain. I don't want to be lost in sorrow. An old grandmother, she said, oh, queen, it hurts because you are holding on to it and you're not giving it voice. Old grandma says, grief and sorrow are two different things, old queen. For grief is our way of praising how we have loved and been touched by what we have loved. But sorrow is when we fail to give it voice, when we keep it inside and don't honor who or what has touched us. So it's time to grieve. An old grandmother, or the queen, she says, but old grandmother, I don't know how to grieve anymore. I have forgotten. An old grandmother, she pulled out this hoop drum and she began to beat a slow rhythm on her drum. And she said, queen, sing your grief. Give it voice. Don't sing in words, just in tones. Let your body and your grief Sing. So she sang, at first very weakly, "Hell, yeah," and with a lot of uncertainty, "Well, yeah." But as the grief came in and gave voice to her song, she began to sing, "Well, Yahweh." And the voice just came and the song came through the queen, and she sang and she sang. And old grandmother said, "Now let your body sway with the rhythm, old queen. Let your grief move through you like a dance. Let it dance through you, for your grief needs movement or it gets stuck inside you." And the queen, she began to sway as she was singing. And then her swinging, it gave way to dance. And suddenly, as the drum beat echoed off the canyon and the moon bathed the queen there amongst those hills, suddenly they heard the sound of the thunder people. With their loud drums, the thunder came rolling over the hills. And as the queen danced, she began to feel the winds return. And with them, she felt for the first time in years drops of rain kissing her face. And after some time, the queen stopped. An old grandmother says, "Now return to your castle. Put your hand on the king's heart and do as I have done for you." The queen started to walk towards the castle, and through the village streets, she saw the people were outside dancing and singing in the rain. In the castle, she saw the king trying to close the windows and bar them shut to keep the winds and the rain outside, when suddenly he saw the queen and he stopped. She walked up to him. She placed her hand on the heart of the king, and his tears began to flow. His soul began to open, and he wept and he cried. The rivers of the land swelled with the water of life, and the trees grew back. The plants grew and yielded medicine and foods. The animals returned, and all the people rejoiced with the return of the waters of life. And that is the story of the queen and the water of life. Oh.